It's a big question. What are the most helpful things for recovery from conditions like ME/CFS? This is today's topic, and who better to discuss this than my guest, who struggled for 7 years, some of this time bedbound, until she found help outside of the very system that we rely on for support. If it's your first time here, welcome. I'm Raelan Agle, and I'm passionate about interviewing people who have recovered from conditions like ME/CFS and long COVID so that we can all learn what actually works for most people. Because, let's face it, we could all use a better roadmap. Today, I'm talking with Susanna Johnson, joining us in Belfast, Northern Ireland. She's not fully recovered yet, but really come a long way. She's back to working part-time, which, let's be honest, feels like climbing Everest when you've been bedbound. She learned how to work with her body instead of fighting it. And there are 9 key things that so far have been crucial to her recovery. And we're going to dive into each and every one that helped her move her from a severe bedbound state and get her back onto her feet. So let's dive in. Susanna, amazing to have you here today. Thanks for doing this.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to be here. So thank you.
Yeah, so like virtually everyone I've talked to, you've had a challenging long journey with this. And of course, everyone has their own unique journey. So take us back. Tell us, how did this all start for you?
Oh gosh. So I suppose it started just at the start of my 20s. So I've just turned 28, so 8 years ago. The end of my first year of university. And I know a lot of people say this, like that's when it obviously started. I do think it came from a way further back, and I now looking back can see different warning signs. But I was incredibly active before, very, very driven, just pushing, in every direction, and was I loved running. So I used to run at least probably 50 kilometers a week. And I noticed that definitely while running, I just felt like I had a bit of a something lacking in the tank. And I was always very, very fit. Wasn't a big deal for me to go for a big long run. So that was one of the starting signs. Then the kind of just different things like dizziness, nausea, that kind of thing. I had a few issues with my hormones. They weren't quite right. My menstrual cycle was always quite off. So investigating that, nothing was kind of coming back. Small little issue with my thyroid, which was fixed with herbal remedies. And then towards the end of my first year of uni, I suppose there were a few things that I think they weren't the causes, but they just kind of pushed me over the edge. So I had a bike crash where I split my chin open, and wasn't extreme, but a bit of a shock to the system. I was put on a medication regarding my hormones, and just totally reacted to that. I think kind of actually that was probably the last straw, where it was the end of the summer and I had come back from a long kind of 7-week holiday away, very active again, wasn't feeling quite right, and decided then to go on that medication. It was called low dose naproxen. And wasn't, to be honest, because I was just a bit all over the place with things, I wasn't quite sure why I was put on it, and I didn't actually question enough. And then looking back, I would have liked to, but anyway, started that very low dose, and for 3 weeks I was on it. By the end of the 3 weeks, I was bedridden, and I just was never the same again until now. But I suppose that's how it happened. But it was just a combination of me being incredibly driven and not listening to my body over and over and over again. So
It definitely resonates. And not the first time I've heard someone explain something similar. And also just, I think this whole process, this whole journey of health changes the way we approach doctors and the medical system. And not saying we should ever disregard medical advice, but I think many of us were brought up with this sort of doctor says take this, you just take it, whatever medication, or you do the thing. Like you show up and you sit and they tell you what to do and you do it, and then you're going to be better.
And I think also
you found.
I think also like when you are fatigued and struggling, I suppose you're more vulnerable to advice that, often is fine and perfect, but in many cases you can end up doing things maybe without questioning, as you would have liked. Definitely in my case, that's what happened.
So, what happened from there?
So from there, I suppose I didn't get a proper diagnosis of chronic fatigue syndrome for another probably 8 months. Again, just tests and tests and tests, different things. But my GP, actually, my general practitioner, just said to me that, listen, I don't know exactly what's going on, but you're showing signs of massive burnout. And he was actually the one who told me to stop exercising. So I think it was around about that time where that medication kind of really put me in bed, but I was still trying to push through stuff, and I did end up in bed for a while. It kind of came out of that, um, and was still pushing. And my GP was like, "If you do not stop, you potentially will be in bed for years." So I think he had seen it before, and he was the one who told me to, kind of ease off. And the thing with I'm sure, most people, is as soon as you let your body rest, it hits you even in more, because I definitely was running on adrenaline and running on an empty tank, really. So as soon as I stopped running was my big kind of one that I suppose I wouldn't let go of until the very end. And as soon as that happened, I think like my symptoms just flared. And so I kept going to university for another 2 years. But to be honest, that was pretty much all I could do. I tried to go to some things here and there, and like everyone, when you're out is when you're doing your best. So it probably seemed to people that I was a lot better than I was. And you also kind of lie to yourself as well. Like, I definitely was just trying to convince myself that I could keep going. And took a year out after my third year of uni, which was a really good decision. But again, I think I gave it a time limit. I said, okay, I'm going to heal in a year and I'll be done, and I needed more time. I kept struggling with symptoms, and I went back to university for my final year, which was quite full on. I'm a physio, or a physical therapist, as it's called in the UK or in the US. And that was very, physical, required a lot of me. And I suppose I just remember, feeling like I was just living behind a glass door or a wall, that like everything was heavy and muffled, and my body felt like lead. And I remember, even on placement and working in hospitals, like physically pulling myself off the stairs, and then coming home and crawling up the stairs. So I really was massively struggling, but I wasn't acknowledging it. It's a big long story, but I suppose, then later on, years later, the last 2 years for me would be the years where I feel like the most of my healing has happened. And I definitely want to make a point that I think those years before, all of that was part of my healing. Even if it was kind of times where I was getting worse, it was a time where I was learning or building on, like figuring out what was working for me. So those times where I was pushing through was still part of my journey of healing. And I suppose I try to look at it as, occasionally I sometimes think to myself, oh, could I have made it faster, or did I waste some time? But actually it was my timing, and that was, that's my journey.
When you and I were chatting a bit before this interview, you had mentioned you tried many things during that time too, but you weren't ready, or it wasn't the right time for them to work.
Yeah.
So tell us about that.
I think for me, in the process, there were times where I wasn't ready to address different things. And for example, just the idea of discipline. Okay. So like in my head, being disciplined in many ways made me sick, because I was incredibly regimented. I pushed, I got up early, I went out running, and I didn't listen. So that idea of being disciplined for me in the early stages of my illness, I just threw out the window. I said, okay, I just have to actually be really easy on myself, really kind of um, lax with everything, and almost, I suppose, I think that led me to maybe not implement some tools that in in my head maybe I could have done earlier. But actually, when I say, oh, I could have, I was not capable. I just wasn't. So um, I suppose it's not that I could have. I wasn't able. And so I think that's really important to acknowledge that, like, we can only handle so much. And when you're struggling with loads of symptoms, um, also grieving what you once were, your identity, your, like, everything you had, I really do feel that for me, I suppose I used to put it that I felt like I was living in my own personally designed hell, which is a horrible, phrase, but it really rang true because every little, like I said, I adore being active. My job is based around activity and athletes, and I couldn't face any of that. I couldn't do any of that. It was all taken away, and I just didn't know how to cope. So when it came to, like, being really, strict on getting to bed early and diet and things like that, I wasn't ready. I wasn't. And then came to a point where I was in a better place myself. I'd learned to be able to handle these things. Then I could be a bit more, I suppose, disciplined and able to kind of address things that I hadn't been before.
Lots of times too, I find that I don't know if you've seen this, Susanna, but there's that concept or that way of living with self-discipline, which it can and isn't be important, for us to do the things we want to do and take care of ourselves. But did you find that there was a shift where it came from originally more self-criticism and then shifted into more self-care?
Yeah.
Because I wonder where that driving yourself so hard, where it came from when you were young,
Exactly.
and how you speak to yourself now.
Yeah.
If that's changed.
100%. and I think that is, like, one of the biggest things, like, I'd say most people learn through illness, is like how to love yourself, how to care for yourself properly. And I did not know how to do that. Very, very harsh on myself, very high standards. And in many ways, it's probably one of the things that led me to overdoing it. But yeah, like, being able to challenge from a place of love and not criticism is incredibly important. And I think, like, when you talk about, oh, where did that come from when you're younger, I really do, and I said previously as well, that my story, although it kind of became very obvious in university, I think it really did partially come from actually my birth. And my mom was in labor with me for 48 hours. And I've done a lot of therapy, a lot of working actually with, I think you've had someone on previously talking about the internal family systems. So a form of therapy that looks at different parts of you that form at a very young age. And we were kind of working through that. And I suppose I'll share one of the little things that came up for me was an image of me as a baby, like just after being born, and this feeling of total overwhelm and everything being too much, but also this feeling of, like, if I don't keep going, I won't survive. And that has always been something that I really resonates with me, that if I don't keep moving, if I don't keep doing, I won't survive. And that is probably where my inability to rest, I didn't know how to rest, and I still struggle. I'm learning, but I think, yeah, definitely the fact that, like, I just didn't know how to sit in myself and be okay with doing nothing. That was probably not even an option for me, because it was a way of surviving, a way of coping. So definitely, yeah. Now this kind of self-discipline, if it's coming from that place of gentleness and compassion, it's much better received by my body and, by myself, really.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So eventually, over those really hard years, how did you start to find your way to what were going to be the things that were going to help you?
Gosh. I think I hit rock bottom too many times. And to be honest, I think, yeah, it was 2 years ago where I was really, really struggling, both physically and mentally. I actually got COVID twice in the space of 5 weeks, and that just relapsed me. I had started working again part time, and I had to drop everything, move home. I really, really couldn't take care of myself. And I had been watching your channel previously, but I kind of rediscovered it at that point, and that's why it's so lovely to be here, because um, I decided, like, I just watched a few of those stories when I was really, really low, and just kept telling myself, like, I'm no different from these people. Like, if someone can recover, I can too. Um, and I suppose it was a real source of hope. And I actually think that um, that's another thing, that kind of taking advice and support from people who've been through it is invaluable. All the Well, many of the people that have helped me through have been people who've either experienced chronic fatigue themselves or know someone who have. And yeah, I think that one of the things that kind of shifted with me was um, I had been to a naturopath previously, um, for hormonal issues, and I had another call with him at that point where I didn't know what to do with myself. I just was like, I don't know where this is ever going to end. Um, and he said to me, and this was really hard to hear, and I didn't actually receive it very well to begin with, but he said, again, he was someone who had chronic fatigue, fully recovered, and he said, if you don't drop everything and stop pushing through this, you're never going to get better. And I was just like, how dare you say that? And it really upset me, because I think I'd never even kind of got a chance to push into my career, and I had no financial savings myself, and he had chronic fatigue later in life, and I was comparing, and I shouldn't have. I don't think comparing is a good idea, but I just felt like he's no idea. Like, I don't have the privilege to do that. But actually, I actually am privileged to have been able to fall back on people. I know some people don't have that. And I just had to accept that. I had to, I suppose, just stop being so stubborn and determined, and just say, okay, this is my life at the moment, and I had to accept it. And I think that is probably, like, accepting and surrendering is the first step, and letting everything hit you like a ton of bricks. It's horrible, but I then was able to, yeah, for I suppose for weeks I was in bed, but that was just this time of, like, true replenishment of you know, my energy. And I didn't feel well at all during it, but I think I had to have that period of time where I was just like, okay, I am going to do absolutely nothing if I don't feel capable, and I didn't. And then eventually little bits come back, and I brought in small little bits of movement, like really, really gently. So that, I suppose, I think the first step for me was surrender, and acceptance. And then there's so many things, it's very hard to, like, whittle it down, but I would say, if I was to pinpoint two things: nervous system regulation and movement and exercise. And when I talk about nervous system regulation, there's so many ways to regulate nervous system, but going back to this, like, what is causing dysregulation? And for me, addressing that was through therapy mainly. Lots of other things, little things along the way, but another really good therapist who had chronic fatigue herself and had been through it, and worked a lot with the internal family system therapy approach, um, allowing me to kind of, I suppose, go back to where is this coming from? Why am I driving myself? Why am I not okay with resting? And being able to, like, we deal with, I suppose, imperfect experiences and interactions with people because we're imperfect. And as you grow up, like, our experiences aren't complete, I suppose, in that, for example, not feeling seen, or not feeling loved or enough, or um, we act from those. We have to, I suppose, cope with that in some way, and we develop patterns. And one of my massive patterns is overachieving and overdoing it. So going back and being with myself at an age where I felt unseen or worthless or whatever, and actually, I suppose, meeting that need in myself from myself, being there for myself, really. It sounds funny, but and simple as well, but it's massively, yeah, transformational. And then with movement, oh gosh, obviously can be helpful. It can be detrimental if it's approached badly or too quickly. And as a physical therapist, I am very passionate about this, and I have brought it into my work. So as a physical therapist, I feel very strongly about this, and I've started bringing it into my work. And with me, my journey, because exercise was such I suppose, a lifeline, when I started bringing it back in, my fatigue, I think, kind of started coming in quite strongly to protect, because in the past I would go, go, go and never stop. And that was kind of, my body knows that. So it tried to protect from that. So big thing for me was exercising while calming my nervous system. So I used EFT, emotional freedom technique, or tapping as it's called, to combine that with exercise and allow myself to kind of, I suppose, just retrain my body to see exercise as safe, but also being able to hold back and not get carried away. Another thing was Pilates. I started doing Pilates, probably the first kind of um, strengthening training that I was doing after being sick. And again, the instructor I met, and her dad had chronic fatigue. So again, she came from a place of understanding, and I just felt safe with that, in knowing that I could go to a class and only do 5 minutes if that was all I was able for, and not be pushed or encouraged to keep going. So I really do think creating an environment that's safe and understanding is invaluable as well. Gosh, there's so many things we could talk about, but yeah. And then getting back into running, I suppose the last point for me with aerobic exercise was, that was a thing that it was my like little last piece of the puzzle. I didn't feel like I was fully recovered until I could run, because that was my favorite thing to do. And I really struggled to get back to it. And I would do even 10 seconds of running would put me in bed for 2 weeks at one point. And actually found approaching it, training in a zone 2 training, heart rate. So monitoring my heart rate and making sure that I don't go above 70% of my heart rate max is a really good way of doing it. And there's loads of science to back it up. It's actually really, really good for mitochondrial density and function. And funny enough, like I said, I think exercise can either enhance healing or also be quite detrimental, only if it's depending on how it's approached. And I think that's why we see sometimes people getting to a point of their recovery slightly further on, and as soon as exercise comes back in, they speed up massively, and like recovery comes back, or health comes back very fast. So that's kind of where I'm at. Like I'm back running. I'm training for a triathlon, and it honestly, it's just surreal. Like but I still have to keep, because I have that tendency to go, go, go. It's still a habit I think I'm always going to have to keep working at. Like we want to be living sustainable lives, and for me, like I've always wanted more, more and more and more. And I've getting to a place where I'm enjoying where I'm at, and that's a big thing as well. What I've learned through this illness is like actually being present, and I don't think I ever was before, like being able to just be present in the moment and being happy where you're at, regardless of regardless of your goals. You can still have goals, but don't make the goal or don't allow the goal to kind of steal the joy of the present and take away from where you're at. But yeah.
No, I'm thinking while you're speaking, how you're saying you recovered in your time and at your pace that was supposed to happen for you. And when I speak to you, I feel like I'm speaking to someone who's 80 years old, and in a good way. Just your insight and your maturity and your knowledge and just all of that wisdom is just incredible. And I think it's something very challenging to achieve by this point in your life, having not gone through something like this. Of course, we never want to wish this on anybody because it's a nightmare to go through, but I just like, do you feel that in you, that it's changed you, that you've, a part of the reason you are who you are right now in this moment is because of all of this that you've gone through?
Yeah, 100%. And like you said, you wouldn't wish this upon anyone or upon yourself, but I wouldn't be the person I am today if I hadn't gone through it. And I think I'd be a worse person, to be honest. I definitely that just piece of being able to be present to yourself, to those around you, living in the moment and experiencing your life right where you're at, is not something I really knew how to do. And just, I suppose, like acknowledging the joy and the beauty of the small little things. I do remember a small little example of when I was just in a forest. I was feeling really unwell and I was living right next to a forest. I went to sit. I just sat among the trees, and like a squirrel, because I was quite still and I wasn't doing much, a squirrel came along and just stood right next to me, or just sat right next to me, and then came up the tree next to me, and I just was like fascinated at being able to see the detail of the squirrel. And in the past, like I would never have even sat in the forest. I'd be running through it, or and I just kind of, I suppose it's just a small little example, but I was missing a lot of the small little beautiful things around me. Not only in nature, but probably in people as well, and in myself. So yeah, that's massively changed. And then just as a physio, um, I I don't think I would have had the understanding. I was really healthy before. I had never really had any health issues, and like I said, I absolutely loved activity, but lots of it. I didn't understand small amounts, and I didn't appreciate it, and I also didn't see that rest, recovery, and activity are a package deal, and you can't have one without the other. And that's where I went wrong, really. And as a physio, you have to understand that. So I suppose I probably would have been a very poor physio. um, so yeah, it's made me better at my job. It's just changed, I suppose, how I relate to myself as well. Yeah, just much gentler on myself. It's taught me how to love myself, and I suppose I wouldn't have been able to properly love others either. And when it comes to really just delving deeper into yourself, like I never was able to be emotional, kind of address the deeper stuff. I had a very kind of hard exterior, and with that, I think you dampen the good emotions too, or not. Sorry, I don't like to say good emotions. The nice, easier emotions to experience, you do dampen them. And I think having now I suppose my emotions are a lot more at the surface, which can be sometimes be an issue, but it's also just, I don't know, a lovely authentic way of living. And I think, yeah, I wouldn't exchange it.
Yeah, I thought it was all so brilliant and so well said. There are little pieces I want to take away and have stitched on a pillow. Like there's still things that I'm still learning, even though I may have learned them. I think, like you said, it's just part of this. It's an ongoing thing that you have to keep kind of reminding yourself and bringing yourself back to these lessons, and not expecting perfection, and that sometimes you're going to kind of fall back and then have to remind yourself. I'm reading Brene Brown's book right now, The Gift of Imperfection, and she talks about how many of us are addicted to numbing ourselves. So we want to numb and push down the challenging feelings and parts of life, but you can't do that and still experience, the easier emotions or good emotions, or however we feel best referring to them. It's either or neither.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I agree. The phrase that actually keeps coming to mind quite recently is, there's so much more. There's so much more in life that we can experience. And this kind of whole biopsychosocial approach to health and the mind, body, spirit. I think if we just approach it, one little piece at a time, we're missing out. And I think I've just experienced so much more. Everything's enhanced when you delve slightly deeper and connect all these things. And it is a hard road. You do experience difficult emotions, or you come across difficult things, but you also experience things that you never would have before if you hadn't kind of delved a bit deeper and made these connections. So it's just an interesting and constantly learning.
Yeah. And I love too what you said about being present in the moment and the things that you were missing. And I think many times being present in the moment can feel scary or overwhelming or depressing or disappointing or uncomfortable. So we just tend to distract ourselves and just not be fully present. But then you miss the squirrel, then you miss the forest, then you miss all of that. So I think it's just like with the addiction to numbing, this tendency towards not being present in the moment as a protective mechanism. I mean, you're not only missing the uncomfortable, you're also missing the wonderful. And you also don't have that ability to work on yourself and your life if you're not paying attention to those things that are uncomfortable. They're never going to be resolved. If you don't address them. So yeah, it's a growth, a journey of internal transformation, as I say. I think in every interview, it's quite the process. Yeah. So you mentioned quite a few different things that you have done, and I know that is not everything. I believe you also worked with Alex Howard's program, correct?
Yeah, that's true.
Okay, and I do hear a bit of what reminds me of some of the things from his book and from his teachings and some of the things you were saying. So what things were helpful for you from that, and what did you take away from that experience?
So I did that program about 2.5 years ago. So kind of like I was saying, that a 2-year period where I really saw a lot of recovery. That was the very beginning of it. And I was hoping going into that program that would be it and I'd be done. But there was a lot more to learn. Yeah. So yeah, that really kickstarted me, and it gave me really good tools to approach pacing well, understanding my patterns that weren't helping me heal. Like I said, my overachieving pattern. I'm a bit of a perfectionist as well, and being able to kind of get to the root of them. So that, I think, I learned tapping there. So that was kind of the start of that. And also just journeying with a group of people was so beautiful and helpful. Kind of bouncing off each other. And actually, we've kept in touch. The group that did the program with me, we've all kind of kept our little group chat going, which I think is quite unusual. But just hearing how people have progressed is really lovely. And I do kind of run my own kind of exercise and tapping classes that some of them have now joined, which is really just really special. So that was really, I think, even reading Alex's book gave me an understanding of definitely like the different stages. So like your stage 1 deep rest, I needed to rest, and actually before the program I had done that. So that was like when I was at home. I accepted it, surrendered it. So I came into the program kind of in that like wired, tired stage, which is the next stage, which is where you have a small bit of energy, but you also really struggle to regulate your nervous system, and you struggle sleeping and start running on adrenaline a bit, and it's very hard to regulate everything. So that's where I was at with that. And then kind of coming into the reintegration stage. So even having an understanding of that and knowing that if I'm in a tired and wired stage, which I kind of came in and out of after, like there's one, I ended up in kind of stage 3 reintegration where I'm feeling a bit more capable, and then overdo it and come back to. So there's been like, it's not a linear journey at all. And having an understanding of that was massively helpful in terms of giving me wisdom to know, okay, what is okay and what I shouldn't be doing. So I think if you're kind of looking for advice on how to, like, because I used to keep asking during that program, like, how do I know I have given my body enough time to heal? Like, what if I do exercise and I'm, I pay for it a few days later, and it's all about knowing where you're at and actually understanding your body and the signs that it's giving you. So that was, yeah, really, really helpful.
Yeah, and some people I interview say I did this one program, it had everything I needed. I was great, I was recovered. But more often, I have interviewed people like yourself who take different
Yeah.
pieces from different places. So I don't think it's so realistic to think that you're going to get all your answers necessarily from one program or from one recovery interview or from one coach. And if you are able, and the good thing is that so much of the information is available for free these days, so it's not like you have to pay for every little nugget that you learn. But yeah, just to be just okay, and that's a part of the process.
Yeah.
But yeah, and sometimes you just need to hear things from different people said in different ways, and it lands in a different way. Like,
Exactly.
oh, okay, I think I get that now.
Yeah, or even just the timing of when you hear it.
Yeah,
Sometimes it lands and sometimes it doesn't. And
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And I know you had mentioned dietary changes as well. So you've probably, like virtually everyone I talked to, tried different things with diet. So what did that look like? And then did it end up being an important piece of this recovery puzzle for you?
It did, but I think probably not as much as maybe I've heard others. I I start I did a few funny kind of diet things, but the main things that stuck with me and I found helpful were just staying away from gluten and dairy, because I found gluten quite hard to digest. Dairy I'm slightly intolerant to, so just anything that I suppose is gonna cost your body a bit more energy. So like, how do I maximize my energy? If that's costing me a bit more and I'm happy to not eat it, then why not? And then cutting out sugar and caffeine were the main things for me, really, actually. Not much more than that. I still don't drink caffeine at all because I find my body is very sensitive, and I react quite strongly to it, and then I end up kind of crashing. Keep sugar to a minimum still, but I eat gluten back now as well, and dairy I keep to a minimum. So I think it was just me trying to figure out, what's best for my digestion. And to be honest, I think my digestion was struggling just because I didn't have the energy to do to work. My body was just exhausted in every way. So I was always bloated no matter what I ate. So there were times where I went on crazy kind of FODMAP diets, and I'm not sure they were massively helpful. I think everything was a struggle for me. And as soon as my body started healing, food wasn't massively an issue. But yes, I think I will keep, I don't think sugar is helpful for many people. So I think I'll keep that going, and same with the caffeine. But other than that, I'm able to kind of process everything else normally now.
Yeah, it's been a very interesting journey for me because when I finally got past chronic fatigue syndrome, and then I wrote a book about it, and here's all the things that I did to get well. And when I look back on it now, all those things got me healthy. How many of them specifically were addressing the MECFS? I no longer think it's necessarily all in one piece.
Yeah.
So I think it's all a journey of learning how to be healthier and better take care of your body. And
definitely.
So is it addressing the fatigue? We don't know, but is it helping our gut health? That whole picture.
I think the way I would put it is, we do all these things to create a healing environment. Like, how do you set up your life so it's best to help you heal? And some of these things, then continue after healing. Others aren't necessary. And maybe they were addressing other little things along the way. But there was definitely a piece where I just needed to do as much as I could to, give as much energy to whatever healing my mitochondria as possible, and away from the maybe unnecessary digestion of some really tough food to digest. But
Yeah.
yeah.
And it is all connected. So even all of that being said, I'm not saying it had nothing to
Mm,
do with my
yeah.
recovery. And that exactly was my approach. And most people that I talk to as well, it's just what I believe my body is built to and meant to thrive
Mm,
under the right conditions. So
yeah,
how can I best support it overall, whether with
exactly.
food, with sunlight, with
Yeah.
breath work, with meditation, with nervous system regulation, with all of that kind of stuff. I know you mentioned hormone balancing and
Mm.
herbal supplements. Was that a big piece of your journey also? How did that play
It
in?
is, yeah. So my thyroid was always kind of borderline. It was never at one occasion, my bloods came back slightly high, and um, the doctor put me on a medication. And because it was, again, so marginal, it pushed me the opposite direction and I got symptoms. And so I actually just came off that. And the naturopath that I mentioned, his name's John Dorn, Dr. John Dorn, but he actually's retired at this stage, but he used to be a pharmacist and moved away from that industry when he got chronic fatigue, and then became kind of a lot more interested in the natural side. So he created just a herbal solution with iodine and different, I actually don't know all the substances he put in it, but specific to me, and it actually just leveled it out completely, and I haven't had an issue since. And same with my reproductive hormones. Never incredibly off, but again, my cycle was never regular, so very hard to tell what level they should be. But I wasn't getting a period, and so um, that again, it actually sort of eased itself out and sorted itself out um, as I healed. And I think my body just maybe just didn't have the energy. It wasn't a priority. Um, wasn't prioritizing that. So that kind of sorted itself out as I addressed other things.
That makes a lot of
Mm-hmm.
sense. So, how are you feeling about things right now, your life in this moment, what you have ahead of you?
Great. Yeah, I keep saying I just feel like I'm experiencing life afresh again, but almost as a new person, as a renewed person. It's very, yeah, I feel very myself, and I've almost feel like I've come home to myself. And it's just lovely. It's lovely to be able to pursue things that I've dreamed of. Work is going really well, and I'm really loving, walking side other people, recovering from lots of different things. And yeah, I think the one thing I would say is it's still a journey. Like, I would say my body is reacting to nearly everything pretty normally, but I think you almost kind of deal with, well, first of all, a bit of grief. I'm kind of grieving, and now that I'm experiencing things again normally. The grief is hitting me again. Wow, like my 20s, I couldn't experience life as I wish I could have, and that's um it hits me in waves, but it can be quite upsetting. Um, and then at the same time, I'm reconditioning. I'm reconditioning after 8 years of being very inactive, which can pose some issues, little niggles here and there. And also just again, I don't know if I would put it as PTSD, but when tiredness does come on, it can be scary. And for example, this past weekend, I actually was away with a few friends in Amsterdam for the weekend, and I actually really struggled emotionally. I didn't feel very well. It's just, we had a really early flight, which again is normal to feel tired, but I think I panicked a bit. There's lots of people, I was very overstimulated, and I did get a bit emotional, thinking I can't cope, I'm not healed, and it's not that, it's just that my body's still readjusting to normal life, and I do have a tendency still to kind of to want to do everything, and we can't do everything. We have to, rest is essential. Um, so yeah, feeling good about life, but I also keep being reminded of the importance of pacing, and still ticking away at these little patterns that I sometimes fall into.
I appreciate you sharing that
Mhm.
because it's definitely normal and understandable and something that's not talked about a lot.
Mhm.
And I think scary for virtually everyone who's navigating this recovery phase
Mhm.
because we don't do a lot of videos on how do you handle this part.
Yeah.
So I think it's inevitable, and I'm sure very validating for people to hear that like
Mhm.
it's okay, it's going to happen, and
Yeah.
just slowly we'll work the way through it. And it's a trauma that we've all been
Mhm.
through, so you're also processing that on top of the grief, on top of the fear.
Yeah.
It's you've gone through something very difficult, so
Yeah.
there's a lot to process as you move your way through. So just a lot of patience with yourself and compassion, and it takes time. There is no magical finish line that we cross and then poof,
Exactly. Yeah.
it's all behind us.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, well, it's very generous and brave of you and kind of you to be here and share your story. I have no doubt that it will be appreciated and meaningful to countless people. So thank you so much for doing this. And I'm going to link as well, because I did interview Alex
Mhm.
Howard, who you mentioned from his program. So I'll put his interview for people watching, listening. If you haven't seen it, he talks about a lot of great things, concrete stuff about how to decode your fatigue.
Yeah.
And what I found most interesting is that he learns the most from his most difficult cases. So the
Mhm.
people who don't recover as expected, okay, so what do we need to do in these cases? So a lot of really great stuff there. So thank you so much, Susanna, for
Thank you,
being here.
Raelan.
I really appreciate
Yeah.
you.
No, and thank you. And like I said, your channel did get me through very hard times, so I really appreciate it. And it's lovely to be able to get my story out there too.
It's so great to pay it forward.
Yeah.
And yeah, really wonderful to have you here.
Yes.
Thank you to everyone for watching, for listening. Looking forward to hearing your thoughts and hoped to have you join me in the interview with Alex Howard.